So if you're listening to this right now, I want you to imagine a political scenario that, honestly, it sounds almost like science fiction.
Yeah, it really does.
Right. Imagine this massive, sprawling country, over 1 billion people, and they pass this radical law virtually overnight. It's a constitutional amendment that literally forces the entire nation to hand over exactly 1/3 of all local political council seats to women.
And not just seats, right, but 1/3 of all council leadership positions, too.
Exactly. Just instantly. A mandatory, totally non-negotiable quota.
Which is, I mean, it's a massive shock to the system. And if you look at that from the outside, you immediately build this mental model of what happens next. You force political power. You expect economic access to follow.
Right. If you are like me, you assume this is the moment the floodgates just burst open. You expect an instant revolution. You picture this massive wave of women marching out of their homes, signing formal employment contracts and taking up modern factory jobs with, steady paychecks, fixed hours, an HR department.
Yeah, you expect the political power to basically buy them the iron rice bowl of modern employment.
Exactly. But I'm going to ask you, the listener, to take that assumption, that completely logical mental model, and just throw it entirely out the window.
Because the reality of what actually happened was, well, it was far stranger.
So much stranger. It was far more invisible. And it completely reshaped a massive underground economy in ways literally nobody predicted. So prepare to have your assumptions totally shattered today. The result of this massive political shockwave was not a boom in comfortable factory jobs.
No, not at all.
It was a bizarre, unprecedented explosion of invisible female bosses.
And we are talking about millions of them, seemingly appearing out of thin air in a sector of the economy that operates almost entirely off the grid.
So, welcome to the deep dive. Today's mission is this epic exploration of a truly counterintuitive, almost mind-bending study by economists Ejaz Ghani, William R. Kerr, and Stephen A. O'Connell.
It's a brilliant piece of work.
It really is. We are zeroing in on a very critical, very specific window in India's history, basically the years between 1994 and 2005. And our goal today, we need to uncover how raw political power forced its way into what economists call the informal economy, and why it turned millions of women into desperate entrepreneurs instead of, secure employees.
What is genuinely fascinating here is how the researchers were even able to measure this in the first place, because it relies entirely on this beautiful piece of bureaucratic chaos.
Bureaucratic chaos is the perfect way to put it.
Right. So in 1993, India passed the 73rd Constitutional Amendment. This is the law that mandated that at least 1/3 of all seats in local village councils, they're known as gram panchayats, had to be reserved for women.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of this because it's super crucial for you listening to understand the setup. It's a sweeping national mandate from the federal government. But there's a catch, right?
Yeah.
A massive logistical twist.
A huge twist. The thing is, state and local elections in India, they do not happen on a single synchronized national schedule. Every single state has its own existing rolling election cycle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so while the federal government hammered down this mandate in 1993, the actual implementation, like the literal moment women took their oaths and sat in those reserved seats, it was completely staggered.
So it's not like flipping a single light switch for 1 billion people all at once.
Not at all. Some states held their local elections and implemented the female quotas in 1994. Other states, well, they didn't hit their election cycle until 1995.
And some dragged it out even longer.
Right. Exactly. Some delayed it through legal challenges or just administrative hurdles, and they didn't get around to it until 1997, 2000, or even 2002.
Okay, so it's like rolling out a massive mandatory operating system update for your phone.
Right.
But every single user hits install in a totally different year.
Okay.
From a government efficiency standpoint, that sounds like an absolute nightmare.
Ooh, it is an administrative nightmare. But if we pull back and look at it through the lens of economic research, this asynchronous, messy rollout is basically the holy grail.
Because it creates a natural experiment.
Exactly. Think of it this way. If every single state had implemented the quota on January 1st, 1994, and then we suddenly saw a massive surge in female business ownership later that year, the skeptics would just have a field day.
I see where you're going. The skeptics would just say, well, the whole national economy was booming that year. Trade policies changed. The weather was great for farming. It had absolutely nothing to do with the female politicians.
Right. You couldn't prove causality. You couldn't separate the political law from just a random economic boom.
Yeah.
But because of this staggered rollout, the researchers, they don't have to guess. They can isolate the exact specific moment the political shockwave hit each individual state.
So they can treat it like real-world A/B testing.
Yes. They can track State A, which implemented the quota in 1994, and compare its female economy year by year against State B, which, didn't implement it until 2001.
They can essentially control for time. They can pull back the veil
Mhm.
and prove definitively whether the law was the trigger. That is so smart.
It's incredibly elegant. And they used massive national surveys from 3 critical years, 1994, 2000, and 2005, to track the fallout of this rolling political shockwave.
Okay, so we have this perfect natural experiment. But to really grasp the magnitude of what happened for the listener, we have to talk about where this impact actually took place. Because we are not talking about corporate boardrooms in Mumbai, right?
No, definitely not.
We're not talking about high-tech software parts in Bangalore. The question we have to answer is, how does a political mandate reach into an invisible underground economy where, for all intents and purposes, the formal government doesn't even exist?
To answer that, we have to define the battleground. The economists refer to this as the unorganized or informal manufacturing sector. Now, when you and I hear the word manufacturing, our minds immediately go to the organized sector.
Right, I'm picturing smokestacks, assembly lines, ID badges, corporate taxes, health and safety inspectors walking around with clipboards.
The modern industrial complex. But in India, during this 1994 to 2005 window, the unorganized sector accounted for a staggering 99% of all manufacturing plants.
Wait, pause. Let me make sure I heard that right. 99%.
99%.
That is insane.
It is, and it absorbed roughly 80% of the entire manufacturing workforce. The organized modern sector, the factories with the ID badges, it is practically a statistical rounding error when you look at the sheer number of physical facilities.
So this unorganized sector is basically the economic dark matter of India.
Dark matter is the perfect analogy. It is astronomically massive, it holds the entire local economy together, but it is largely invisible to traditional financial metrics.
We really need to paint a picture of the grit of this sector for you listening. We are talking about microenterprises here. The official definition usually means fewer than 10 workers if they happen to use electricity, or maybe up to 20 workers if they don't.
But in reality, it's even smaller than that.
Exactly. These places do not pay corporate taxes. They aren't registered with any state board of commerce. They don't have business licenses. They operate completely off the grid. This isn't a factory. This is like a family weaving bamboo baskets in the dirt courtyard of their home. It's 3 people rolling tobacco leaves into cigarettes in a poorly lit back alley.
And this hidden, totally off-the-grid world is where the spreadsheet just ruins the fairy tale, because the researchers zeroed in on this dark matter economy, and what they found was a bizarre, explosive surge.
A huge surge.
Yeah. Between 1994 and 2005, the share of female business ownership in this unorganized manufacturing sector doubled. It skyrocketed from 9% to 19%.
And just to put the sheer velocity of that into perspective, the researchers note that overall manufacturing employment for everyone in India during this same 11-year period, it grew by a miserable 17%.
Right. Barely moving.
Barely moving at all. But female-owned businesses, they experienced an insane gravity-defying 203% growth. Let me just repeat that. 203% growth in female business ownership.
In raw numbers, that represents over 4 million new women-owned establishments just appearing out of thin air in just over a decade.
But see, this is where the conflict starts for me. Because India's female labor participation rate is historically notoriously low.
Yes, very low.
Traditionally, deeply entrenched cultural and patriarchal norms have heavily restricted women's physical movement outside the home. So when we see a 203% spike, this sudden wave of millions of female CEOs, I have to ask, is this a sign of booming progressive prosperity? Or is this a desperate, grueling struggle for basic survival that's just disguised as entrepreneurship?
Well, that question is basically the entire crux of this deep dive. And to solve it, the researchers asked the most logical follow-up question.
Which is?
If these new political quotas are so incredibly powerful that they caused a 203% surge in female business owners, what did they do for the regular female worker?
No, that makes sense.
Did these newly empowered female politicians manage to build modern infrastructure, attract capital, and hand out secure wage-paying jobs to the women who actually voted for them?
Which is the dream, right? That is the political promise. You elect a woman, she fights the local bureaucracy for zoning permits, a mid-sized garment factory opens up in the district, and suddenly thousands of local women have steady paychecks, fixed hours, and actual economic independence. They become employees.
Right. So the researchers combed through the data from multiple massive national databases like the National Sample Survey Organization and the Annual Survey of Industries. They were specifically looking for a spike in female employment.
They wanted to see the growth in the total number of women holding regular wage jobs in manufacturing after these quotas hit.
Exactly.
I feel like you're setting me up for a disappointment here. What did the numbers actually show?
Zero.
Wait, you mean the growth was just really small?
I mean, it was statistically zero. Flat lines. The numbers completely contradict the narrative we all want to believe. The political quota did not increase women's overall employment in manufacturing at all. None. Not in the highly regulated, organized sector, and not even in the off-the-grid, unorganized sector. Having women in power did absolutely nothing to get ordinary women hired as wage workers.
That makes absolutely no logical sense. If female employment didn't go up, like if no one is getting hired, where did 4 million new female bosses come from? Who on earth is working for them?
This is the shocking reversal at the very heart of the paper. The quota did not increase wage employment. What it directly caused was an explosion in female sole proprietorships.
Sole proprietorships, just one person.
Yes. By mapping the economic data over the timeline of those staggered elections we talked about, the economists found that the implementation of the quota caused the creation of new female-owned businesses to instantly spike by roughly 40% in those specific states.
Wait, I think I'm putting the pieces together. The women didn't go out into the world and get hired by a factory. They simply stayed home, didn't hire anyone else, and just became their own boss.
That is the crucial insight. This completely shatters our traditional Western assumptions about how political empowerment translates to economic power.
Yeah, because we usually think of empowerment as this very structured ladder, right?
Yeah.
You get an education, you get an entry-level job, you earn a steady wage, you build up some savings, and then finally you take a risk and start a business.
Exactly. But here, the latter simply does not exist. They bypass the wage labor market entirely. They jump straight from nothing into ownership.
But I struggle to use the word ownership or entrepreneur here.
Yeah.
Because for anyone listening, the word entrepreneur conjures up a very specific image. We picture someone, drafting a business plan, securing a commercial lease, pitching to a local bank, hiring a small team. Are these women actually doing that, or are they just trapped in their own kitchens with a fancy new statistical title?
The data paints a very clear and honestly a deeply sobering picture of their reality. The researchers divided these new millions of businesses into two strict categories: independent, standalone facilities, and household-based enterprises. And what they found was that nearly 100% of these newly created female businesses were entirely household-based.
So they literally never leave the house. Let me guess the head count.
They're microscopic. The vast majority have fewer than 3 employees, which usually just means the woman herself and maybe a daughter or a sister. In fact, the data reveals that 90% of all female employment in this entire unorganized manufacturing sector remains firmly, immovably locked behind the front door of the home.
Man, it's like being handed the keys to the entire kingdom by the government, but the fine print on the contract says you are only allowed to redecorate your own basement.
That is a brutally accurate way to describe it.
They finally have a political voice. Their female representative is physically sitting in the council chair making decisions, but their everyday economic reality is still confined to their dirt floor living room.
And that confinement becomes even more glaring when you look at the industry breakdown, because you would naturally think that an injection of political power brings modernization, right?
Sure, you'd expect these new female entrepreneurs to break into new emerging markets, or at least, upgrade their technology.
Instead, the researchers found this unbreakable, invisible industry red line.
I actually read this part of the study, and it is staggering. Over 90% of these millions of new female businesses are crammed into just 6 ancient, historically low-tech industries.
Very low tech.
We are talking about tobacco, specifically the incredibly tedious work of hand-rolling beady cigarettes, along with textiles, wood products, chemical products, food products, and basic furniture.
High-tech manufacturing, or honestly anything requiring heavy capital investment, it remains a complete ghost town for women. In industries like computing machinery or refined petroleum, the female ownership share is literally 0%.
0%.
Zero. Even in fabricated metal products, it's hovering around 1%. The 200% surge in entrepreneurship was entirely concentrated in the absolute lowest tech, most traditional labor-intensive sectors imaginable.
So the question is, why? If you have the political wind at your back, why are you stuck in the mud? Why are you hand-rolling tobacco leaves when you finally have local political power?
I'd imagine it has to do with the barriers to entry in the formal market, right?
It has everything to do with barriers to entry, and specifically the networks that already existed. The economists point out that these women are building solely on what they know because they have no other bridge.
Makes sense.
In a deeply conservative society, a woman trying to start a formal, outside-the-home business is going to face immense social and logistical friction. She likely doesn't have property rights to use as collateral for a bank loan.
Right.
She faces severe social stigma if she travels alone to wholesale markets to buy heavy machinery, and she likely lacks STEM education.
So she just takes the path of least resistance.
She turns to the industries where other women in her village are already working. She relies on highly localized female networks to figure out how to source raw tobacco, how to find middlemen buyers, and how to navigate the local market without ever physically leaving her home. Okay, so we have established this massive explosion of home-based, low-tech, invisible female bosses. But I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a skeptical data scientist listening to this.
Okay, I'm ready.
We are talking about a very messy, rapidly developing economy from 1994 to 2005. A lot of things were changing in India then. How do we prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this insane surge is actually caused by the political quota and not just a massive coincidence?
It's a fair question.
Like maybe the states that implemented the quota early in 1994 were just naturally more progressive, wealthier states, and their female economies were already booming before the law even passed.
That is the exact critique the economists knew they had to address. They had to prove this wasn't just a simple correlation. And to do that, they used a statistical concept called parallel trends.
Parallel trends.
Yeah, it's basically a way of proving that the starting lines were fair. They looked intensely at the baseline data from 1994 before the vast majority of these quotas had actually taken effect on the ground.
And what did that 1994 baseline look like across the country?
The states looked practically identical. The researchers graphed out the survival curves, meaning, how long these microbusinesses managed to stay open before failing, and they mapped the age structures of female businesses across the different states.
Right.
The lines on the graph overlapped almost perfectly. There were no hidden pre-existing progressive trends skewing the data. The states that ended up implementing the quota in 1995, they didn't have any sort of head start on female entrepreneurship compared to the states that dragged their feet and implemented it in 2000.
Okay, so you've proven the starting line was exactly the same for everyone, but that's just the baseline. How do you actually prove the political quota was the specific trigger that fired the gun? Because you can't just put these states in a giant petri dish and isolate them from the rest of the global economy.
Okay.
Wait, did they look at the borders?
That is exactly what they did. They used something called a border discontinuity test.
Okay, I want to translate this out of the academic jargon, because it is brilliant.
Oh, it is. I want you to imagine an invisible state line drawn in the dirt. You have two neighboring villages. They share the exact same geography. If it rains on both of them.
Same weather, same dirt.
Exactly. The local culture, the language, the social norms, the historical biases, all completely identical. They are essentially the exact same local microeconomy, just arbitrarily split by an invisible administrative border on a map.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Two villages, literally a mile apart, maybe separated by a dried riverbed, but technically residing in different states.
Now, State A, the village on the left, implements the female political quota in 1995. A woman takes charge of the council. State B, the village on the right, well, they delay through legal loopholes, and they don't implement the female quota until 2002.
Right.
The researchers then look at these specific bordering villages in the year 2005.
And what happens when you cross that dried riverbed?
The village in State A, which had the female political quota longer, saw a massive, undeniable gap in female entrepreneurship compared to its immediate neighbor in State B. Yeah, the academic paper states this as an elasticity coefficient of 0.555, which is highly statistically significant.
Wait, elasticity coefficient of 0.555 sounds like it absolutely belongs in a graduate statistics seminar. Translate that for me and the listener. What does that number actually mean for the women on the ground?
Simply put, it means that for every 10% increase in the amount of time a region has been exposed to the female political quota, there is roughly a 5.5% pure increase in the number of female-owned businesses.
Just a direct mathematical link.
It is a direct mathematical chain reaction.
So you cross a street, an invisible administrative border, and you step into a completely different economic universe for women.
Precisely. Because those two villages share the exact same culture, weather, and geography, you eliminate all the hidden variables. You eliminate the good harvest theory or the naturally progressive culture theory.
The only difference is the politics.
The absolute only difference between those two villages is how many years they've had women sitting in local political power. This mathematically proves, through real-world A/B testing, that the political timeline is the exact trigger for the entrepreneurship boom.
That is an incredibly elegant way to prove causality.
Yeah.
But of course, human nature is cynical.
Oh, always.
Whenever you have a government mandate combined with a massive, sudden explosion of an underground, unregulated business sector, everyone immediately assumes it's a scam.
It's the very first place the mind goes, and frankly, it's a responsible assumption for an economist to test.
Exactly. If I'm listening to this, I hear unorganized sector and surge in female owners, and I immediately think, okay, the men are just hiding their existing businesses under their wives' names to dodge taxes. Or they're trying to take advantage of some new government quota loophole. Or maybe it's just straight up political corruption.
Which is why the researchers had to tackle these theories head on.
So let's bust the myths. Let's start with the most obvious one. Myth number 1, tax evasion and name swapping.
Right. If this was just a massive data game, millions of husbands erasing their names on a form and writing in their wives' names to hide from the tax man, then the entire premise of the study collapses.
It's all fake.
Exactly. But the economists explain why this specific data is incredibly robust against that theory. The data comes from the National Sample Survey Organization, or NSO.
And how does the NSSO actually work on the ground? Because it's clearly not the Indian equivalent of the IRS, right?
No, it is entirely disconnected from the tax authorities. It is an independent, door-to-door household census. Furthermore, the unorganized sector, by its very definition, is largely exempt from corporate taxes anyway.
Because they're just too small.
Right. These businesses are tiny. There is absolutely no financial incentive for a husband to lie to an NSSO enumerator about who owns the basket weaving operation to save on taxes, because they aren't paying corporate taxes in the first place.
And it's not just a paper form you fill out and mail in, right? It's not a self-reported online survey where you can just lie.
No, definitely not. The enumerators literally walk up the dirt path to the house. They conduct exhaustive in-person interviews. They visually confirm the operations. If the survey says a woman is operating a loom, the enumerator physically sees the woman sitting at the loom in her living room.
Okay, so it is an incredibly detailed, on-the-ground, visual confirmation. This is not a paper trick. The women are genuinely doing the work and running the operations.
They absolutely are.
Okay, so it's not tax fraud. But my mind immediately goes to traditional political corruption. If I'm a newly elected female village council official, isn't my very first move to start handing out lucrative village contracts to my friends, my family, and the women who voted for me?
That leads us right to myth number 2.
Right. Phantom nepotism and government contracts. The cynical view is that these female businesses are just popping up to absorb corrupt government spending.
It sounds totally plausible, especially in a developing political system. But the data absolutely crushes this theory. The NSSO surveys are so detailed that they actually ask these microenterprises who their clients are. Do they buy from the government? Do they sell goods to the government?
Let me guess the percentage. Is it 10%? 5%?
Less than 1%.
Wait, less than 1% of these millions of female businesses ever deal with the government.
Less than 1%. They're selling to private middlemen, local markets, or just their neighbors. And furthermore, the researchers looked at the overall rate of government procurement in these villages before the quotas and after the quotas.
Did it change?
It didn't change at all. The logical chain of corruption is completely broken. The newly empowered female politicians are not handing out municipal contracts for school uniforms or office supplies to female voters. The government is not the customer.
Wow. Which brings us to myth number 3. And this one is fascinating because it goes against the entire global development narrative of the last few decades. The microloan savior bubble.
Yes, this is a big one.
For the last 20 years, the global narrative, pushed by massive NGOs and Nobel Prizes, has been that microfinance, giving tiny institutional loans to women in developing countries, is the ultimate silver bullet for female entrepreneurship. It's the Grameen Bank model.
It is a very popular feel-good story in the West. We like to think that capital solves everything.
Right. But this study delivers a brutal reality check to that narrative. Did millions of female bosses emerge simply because female politicians opened up local access to microloans and credit?
Absolutely not. The data just shatters the microfinance savior complex. The NSSO data tracks external financing very carefully. In a typical year during this massive surge, only 2% to 3% of these female micro-businesses received any external finance at all.
So no banks, no NGOs, no microcredit.
None of it.
So over 97% of these new female entrepreneurs relied entirely on their own empty pockets, or maybe borrowed a few rupees from a family member.
Exactly. They created an economic boom of 4 million businesses without a single dime of institutional credit. In fact, the data showed something even more counterintuitive.
What's that?
The growth rate of businesses without external financing was actually stronger than those with it. Finance was not the driver of this revolution.
Okay, so let's take a breath and figure out where we are. We have eliminated tax fraud. We have eliminated government contracts and corruption. We have eliminated bank loans and microfinance.
All right.
If there are no loans, no contracts, and no actual wage jobs being created, how on earth did a female politician sitting in a council office create millions of female bosses in their kitchens? What is the actual invisible mechanism here? How does political power translate to rolling tobacco?
The Economist proposed two major proven secrets. And the first one has to do with sinking infrastructure, specifically downgraded, localized, highly targeted public infrastructure.
Walk me through the physics of that. How does infrastructure create a business without money?
It comes down to a brilliant observation from prior studies, like the famous research by economists Raghuram Chattopadhyay and Esther Duflo. They found that when female politicians take power in these village councils, they dramatically shift how public money is spent.
Shifting away from what?
They stop funding massive, high-profile vanity projects or things that primarily benefit men, and they fiercely redirect funds toward what women actually desperately need on a daily survival basis: clean drinking water and paved village roads.
But again, how does a water well create a business? I feel like I'm missing the leap here.
The leap is time. It is the mechanics of time poverty. In these rural villages, fetching water is strictly, traditionally women's work. It can take 3 to 4 hours every single day to walk to a distant, clean water source, wait in a long line, and carry heavy containers back to the house.
3 to 4 hours a day just for water.
Every single day. But if a newly elected female council leader uses her budget to build a new well right in the geographic center of the village, or paves a muddy road that makes transportation significantly faster, she fundamentally alters the physics of a woman's day. She gives those women their time back.
I see it now. The time is the capital.
Exactly. Those 3 or 4 saved hours a day are the seed capital. That time directly, physically converts into labor hours for a home-based business. A woman who was previously exhausted from walking miles for water now has 3 extra hours to sit in our courtyard and weave baskets.
They don't need a bank loan because they have no formal overhead. They need time.
Yes. A strategically placed local well stimulates entrepreneurship faster and more effectively than a microloan ever could because it removes the massive physical burden that was preventing labor in the first place.
That is brilliant. It's so simple, yet so profound. The infrastructure literally buys them time. And time is the absolute only asset they have to invest. It's sweat equity in its purest form.
It really is.
But you mentioned a second secret. If infrastructure provides the time, what provides the spark?
The second secret is deeply psychological. It's the invisible light of role models.
Role models.
Yeah. The Economist cite a famous finding by researcher Lori Beeman and her colleagues. In deeply patriarchal societies, there is an entrenched, systemic cognitive bias about what women are inherently capable of. And that bias is internalized by the women themselves.
Of course.
But when a political quota is forcefully enacted, something radical happens to the social psychology of the village.
A woman has to take charge publicly.
Right. Suddenly, a woman is commanding a village meeting, she is directing funds, she is arguing with contractors, she is speaking with authority in a public square where she previously wasn't even allowed to raise her voice.
It has to be jarring for everyone.
It is. Seeing a female leader in that position shatters deeply entrenched biases, not just for the men observing, but for the women themselves.
It's a psychological unlock. It completely rewrites your internal assumptions about what is actually possible. If you're a woman who has only ever been told her place is silent and in the background, seeing someone who looks like you in a position of supreme local authority must be earth-shattering.
It is. Beeman's research proved that simply being exposed to female leaders systematically raises educational expectations and career ambitions for young girls and their parents. It aggressively reduces the aspiration gap.
Okay, so picture a woman sitting at home. She suddenly has 3 extra hours today because of the new water well. She looks out her window, sees the female council leader directing a road paving crew, and thinks, well, if she can run the entire village, I can figure out how to run a small weaving business.
Exactly. It's a chain reaction of confidence and time.
That is incredibly powerful. But as much as I love that narrative of empowerment, we really have to look at the dark side of this coin. We've talked about the incredible boom, the number of female bosses tripled, they have time, they have confidence.
But it's not all a success story.
No, we have to look at the cruel anatomy of what these micro-businesses actually are. Because the study points out something deeply troubling. Why is the actual wealth of these female business owners falling further and further behind the men?
Because the numbers behind the boom are brutal. The Economist compared the financial health of the female-owned unorganized businesses directly to the male-owned ones in the same sector. And they found that female-owned businesses are undeniably second-class in scale and output.
How bad is the gap? Give me the numbers.
Their average output, meaning the actual financial shipment value of the goods they produce and sell, is merely 18% of the male-owned businesses.
Just 18%.
18%. Their fixed assets, the tools and equipment they own, are only 32% of the men's. And here's the most painful, counterintuitive fact of the entire study.
Tell me.
Over the 11-year study period from 1994 to 2005, instead of catching up as they gained more experience, this productivity and asset gap actually widened.
Wait, so the sheer quantity of female businesses exploded by 200%.
Right.
But the quality, like the actual wealth generation and efficiency, got worse relative to men. They are falling further behind.
Yes. Because the massive influx of new businesses were so small, so undercapitalized, and trapped in such low-tech industries, they basically dragged down the overall statistical averages for female entrepreneurs.
That makes sense.
They're multiplying rapidly, but they're multiplying at the absolute bottom rung of the economic ladder. They aren't growing into mid-sized businesses. They are just creating more and more tiny, low-yield operations.
And it gets even more isolated when you look at who they actually hire, assuming they grow enough to hire a neighbor, right?
Yeah.
We talked earlier about this invisible industry red line. The researchers also found an incredible level of demographic segregation in this unorganized labor market.
It is absolute extreme segregation. The data shows that female-owned firms hire 92% women. Male-owned firms hire 97% men.
Wow.
The two economies barely interact on a labor level. They are entirely siloed.
This raises such a massive philosophical and economic question for you, the listener. Think about this dynamic. On one hand, you could look at this and say, this women helping women dynamic is a beautiful thing. It's creating a necessary safe harbor.
Right. In a deeply conservative society where a woman might face severe harassment, discrimination, or physical danger entering a male-dominated factory, working for another woman in a quiet, home-based setting is a crucial, safe entry point into the economy.
That is the optimistic, empowerment-focused view. It provides agency, safety, and a first step. But the economists force us to really encourage critical thinking here. If we look coldly at the data, the 18% output, the 32% assets, we have to ask the difficult question, is this safe harbor actually an invisible prison wall?
That's the terrifying thought. By isolating themselves entirely from the male-owned firms, which have mathematically 80% more output and 3 times the assets, are these women inadvertently keeping themselves locked out of the broader, much more lucrative male economy?
Are they shielding themselves from the very networks that hold the real capital and technology?
They're essentially building a parallel economy, but it's a parallel economy built on pennies while the men next door are trading in dollars. Which leads us to the ultimate question of labor flow.
Exactly. Because if running a home weaving business or rolling tobacco leaves for 10 hours a day pays even less than a normal entry-level wage job, why are millions of women willingly walking into this scenario? It sounds like an economic trap. Where are they actually coming from?
They are coming from a place of desperation. The researchers point out a vital piece of context regarding where this labor pool originates. These new entrepreneurs did not leave cushy, middle-class office jobs to chase a Silicon Valley startup dream.
Obviously not.
They spilled over from doing entirely unpaid domestic household labor, or they were aggressively squeezed out of the agricultural sector.
So picture a giant hourglass. Agriculture is mechanizing, or the weather is becoming unpredictable, farming is becoming less profitable, and these rural families desperately need cash. The women who were previously doing invisible, unpaid farm or domestic work just fall through the neck of the hourglass.
Exactly. This is a survival mechanism. It is a spillover of pure desperation. They overflow into the absolute lowest tier of manufacturing, the unorganized, home-based sector, because they have absolutely nowhere else to go.
The formal sector, the organized factories, simply aren't hiring them.
Right. They don't have the education, the collateral, or the societal freedom to start a high-tech firm. So they do the only thing left. They weave baskets and roll tobacco in their kitchens.
Okay, we need to summarize this massive institutional tragedy, this vicious cycle, because it is so incredibly complex. Let's look at the theoretical clash. On one side, the political quota absolutely worked.
It did. It forced a shock into the system. It gave women a local voice. It physically freed up their time by redirecting funds to water wells and roads. It shattered deeply held psychological barriers by providing visible role models in power.
Right. It successfully activated the very bottom of the economy and turned 4 million women into business owners.
Yes, we cannot discount that. All of those are massive historic victories for empowerment and representation. But the stark reality of the data shows that without a structural bridge to formal industries, without real technology upgrades, and without actual financial capital, these women are forever trapped in a low-value, informal mud pit.
Political empowerment alone simply cannot conquer economic reality. You can give a woman the right to vote. You can even put her in charge of the entire village council. But if the only economic opportunity available to her and her constituents is rolling cigarettes on a dirt floor for pennies, she is still fundamentally trapped in poverty.
That is the ultimate institutional revelation of the Ghani, Kerr, and O'Connell study. It proves that you need the political push to start the engine, to buy the time and provide the psychology, but you desperately need structural economic bridges to actually drive the car out of poverty.
You need access to formal markets, STEM skills training, property rights, real capital. You cannot have one without the other.
Exactly.
It is an incredible, exhausting, completely fascinating journey through the data. To think it all started with a constitutional mandate in 1993, evolved into a staggered, chaotic rollout that economists used as a natural experiment and resulted in an explosion of 4 million informal female bosses.
A boom driven not by bank loans or corporate contracts, but by village water wells and the sheer psychological power of seeing a woman in charge.
Yet, tragically, a boom that left millions caged in low-tech, household-based poverty.
It is a profound historical lesson in how deeply intertwined politics, psychology, and raw economics truly are. And it shows how complex the road to true, equitable prosperity is.
But before we sign off, I want to take this highly specific 1994 to 2005 Indian data, and I want to drop it right into your lap today, wherever you're listening to this.
Oh, how do you mean? What is the modern parallel?
Look at the world right now. Just look around. Look at the AI revolution automating tasks. Look at the massive global economic transitions happening in the West. Look at the explosion of the gig economy.
Oh, you're talking about Uber drivers, Etsy sellers, freelance task workers on Fiverr?
Exactly. I'm talking about the modern parallel to the unorganized sector. We are currently witnessing a massive global wave of what economists call forced informalization.
That makes total sense.
Massive corporations are actively shedding secure, W-2 wage jobs with health benefits and replacing them with independent contractors. Millions of people are becoming sole proprietors or freelancers, not out of some grand, empowered entrepreneurial vision, but out of sheer necessity.
They're working from their own homes or their own cars, using their own personal assets, with absolutely zero safety net, sick leave, or HR department to protect them.
The technological scale is obviously very different, but the underlying economic mechanics are strikingly similar. The overflow of labor into informal, low-security work due to a lack of formal opportunities.
It's the exact same dynamic, just in a digital wrapper.
So I want to leave you with a provocative thought to mull over.
Yeah?
Ask yourself, are today's digital gig workers navigating a highly advanced modern economy with no safety nets and no formal structure, simply repeating the exact same fate as the rural Indian women of 1994?
Are we all just getting the digital keys to the kingdom only to find out we're permanently locked in the basement, trading our time for pennies while the formal economy pulls further and further away?
History doesn't repeat, but it certainly rhymes.
That is a chilling but deeply necessary thought to end on. It reframes how we look at the future of work entirely.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep questioning the narrative, and we'll see you next time.